Okay, we are recording. Rhys Lewis, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. I'll tell you what, this is it's the first time I've been nervous in ages. I've not recorded one this year. I think I recorded so many in December. I'm kind of well ahead of myself, so I feel a bit out of practice. I normally do about
Yeah.
five a week, and I've not done any for ages. So yeah, be gentle with me today, mate.
Oh no, I was going to say the same for me. I've not done an interview in a long time, so yeah, I think we're both in the same boat.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love that. Um, well, look, before we get on with anything, did you have a nice kind of festive break? How was it for you?
Yeah, it was really good. Oh, by the way, sorry, am I supposed to be recording my audio this end?
No, no,
No,
you're all
no.
good.
Oh, great, perfect. Sorry. I had a great festive break, but I was a bit ill. I feel like everyone was ill over the holidays,
Yeah,
and I've only just really gotten better. So luckily, just in time for tour. But Christmas Eve and Christmas Day was pretty miserable because my family basically said to me, "We've got my brother's got a baby, a new baby," and so they were like, "I think you should just stay in your own little weird cave and get better on your own for the next few days." So I was basically just on my own for Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and
vanished.
I was banished basically. The baby banished me. But no, it was really nice to just be around everyone again. It's like the part of the year where you just actually get some time to see everyone. So it's really nice.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, look, let's start your playlist, and we always start with track one, which is the song with the greatest ever intro.
Great question. I've actually really enjoyed going through all the questions you ask because they're just good to go down memory lane with songs that you love. I've gone for it was hard because there's a lot of songs like that came to mind. New Order Blue Monday was one that I thought I could go for that because it's such a
Yeah,
great intro. Um, and then I started thinking about one of my favorite bands, Led Zeppelin, and they've got some good intros as well. Immigrant Song I thought could be good, and then I've just ended up going for Good Times, Bad Times. Probably the first ever song I heard of Led Zeppelin, and I think it's the opening track of that album that I fell in love with, and it's just got this amazing sort of like kind of thing. And then John Bonham enters the song with a fill, and it's just so good. It's iconic to me.
absolutely. I'm
Yeah,
always intrigued when people either go one or two ways. They either go for that instant kind of pop hook, like a Help by the Beatles or something just instant,
yeah,
or they go for something more kind of expansive and lean towards things like Floyd and Zeppelin and Hendrix and things like that. It's always kind of it's one or the other. And I'm intrigued to ask you this as a songwriter.
yeah.
When you're approaching writing a new track, and there's so many things to consider now in the way that people consume their music. And also, as I should say, do bear with me. I put my new laptop on today because my old laptop was making my screen go funny. And this is my new laptop, and my screen's just gone funny on here.
How is it?
Yeah, if you see me just kind of looking a little bit pixelated and a bit strange, just bear with me. It's clearly that the software are not. I'm glad I bought a new computer for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Made no improvements.
so bear with that. So in regards to the way that people consume their music now, it's way different to how I consumed mine when I was growing up, and there's so many things that labels lean towards now with getting exposure on things like TikTok and things like that, which is very fast paced and fast moving, and that kind of you're aiming at a market that have got what I'm generalizing but short attention spans. And for instance, if you was to take a Zeppelin track to a label now, they'd probably be like, "Whoa, yeah, you can't release this as a single,"
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and so whether that's right or wrong, that's to be discussed. But when you approach songwriting,
Mm.
are modern trends such as TikTok and them kind of edits to get on Spotify playlists, do they all feature in your creative process in some way, shape, or form?
I personally know. I mean, I'd probably be it'd be stupid of me to say that in the back of my mind somewhere the sort of cultural norms of that are happening don't influence in some way, but not sort of intentionally. Do I
Yeah,
sort of sit down with the idea of those things and go, oh, okay, I want to try and factor that in to my songwriting. I think naturally, like I write pop music, so I think
yeah.
I'm influenced by the kind of the sort of conventions that come with that. But yeah, I find it really interesting how even just going through the songs that I love the intros of and what eras they came from, it almost felt like musicians had more time to like open a song up. And there's a few songs actually on the list where that we'll go through that I actually go, they've got an amazing intro as well. And I wonder if the art of the intro is being lost because of the fact that we're trying to get to the point as quickly as we are now and get into the song. And I do think that that comes from, you know, and it was the same thing back in the early days of radio where songs got shorter and people wanted to, you know, change the format of a song to make sure that people's attention spans were stuck around. So I think there's always been that kind of force at play with, you know, the element of commercial, what works commercially and what artists are trying to do as well. So I think it's sometimes a really healthy thing that things like that kind of push music to do something different, and that's why we, you know, end up with 3-minute 38 pop songs, and people seem to love that form, and it's just something that people really enjoy. But then it's a balance of like, when does it go too far? And I think we're trying to find our feet really with TikTok, because we all know that it's an amazing creative platform when it's done well.
Yeah.
And we all know that it can shape amazing music because of the fact that people are looking for some creative and new original content.
Yeah.
But I also think that it comes with a danger when we're still trying to figure it out as to like how far you let music and art go in that direction for the sake of commerce and money. And it's always that balance, because it is a music industry, and we're all sort of aware that it comes with a price, you know,
of course,
literally and metaphorically. Like, what do we give up in trying to be more popular? And I think back in the day, we probably had less feedback, immediate feedback, which meant we couldn't factor in what the public thought until it was already out. Whereas now you get an immediate response from a demo or an acoustic version or a 10-second clip, and that can be the thing that then pushes you to make your music in a different way, or change the song completely. And that can, again, positives can come from that, but I think we're just finding out where the negatives are and how to deal with them. And but for the sake of art and creativity and hopefully long-lasting music, if we're still thinking about that. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a new era.
It is, and I think, you know, I've asked that question. I've done 470 episodes of this podcast now, and there's been very few artists that have just gone, not in the slightest. You know, I'm all art, and you know, and because it is essentially, it's getting that balance, isn't it? You don't want to compromise too much of the song, and you know, you've got art, but ultimately you still want as many people to hear it as possible, don't you? Because aside from the financial reasons, you know, you're proud of what you've created, and you want to throw it out there and hit, you know, get what people make of it. So I do think it's a pure balancing game, and there's no right or wrong. I think, you know, there's as much as you could write this epic Led Zeppelin 12-minute piece that goes all over the place, that's not any harder or any easier than writing a perfect pop song. That's just as difficult. That 3-minute perfect pop song, you know, that's you know, if everybody could write them, everybody will be, you know, having these huge hits constantly. It's not an easy thing to do. So I'm always fascinated as to what an artist, how they approach that and the intro.
Yeah, totally.
I'm going to take you back, and for track 2, I'm going to ask you to tell me the first song you remember that you had an emotional impact on.
Yeah, so this was a really difficult one, because emotional impact, I suppose when you're a kid, I guess I think about emotional impact now as different to what it probably would have been back then. But I remember initially falling in love with music for the energy of it coming out of the speakers. And artists like Jimi Hendrix, when I was picking up the guitar and learning how to play guitar, I remember hearing Little Wing, and it became a piece of music that I got really obsessed with, and I learned and just wanted to know how he made that sound and what he was doing. And that for me was an emotion. Looking back, it was an emotional impact, because I just felt so much when I heard that music, and especially just his back catalogue in general. Like, he played guitar in such a way that no one else could ever sound like him, and it was just so unique. And so getting into electric guitar and kind of learning the blues, and then hearing this guy Jimi Hendrix play bluesy music but with complexity and different kind of harmony, and I didn't again have the words to know what all that was that he was doing, but I just remember feeling totally blown away and absorbed by what he did as a musician, and the kind of the legend that lived on. Obviously he was long dead by the time I got to know who he was, but yeah, I think Little Wing, in terms of that first musical like moment that I realized I was sort of hooked by it and I found it magical, was probably that song. And then and
What was the
again,
emotion, Rhys?
I I guess it's hard to. I was just in awe. I don't know if that's an emotion. I was a bit in awe. I was a bit. It was like being shown a magic trick. You know, when you're a
Yeah,
kid, and you're like, and now it's weird because I remember that feeling for that song, and actually I've gone on to learn more about music and harmony, and even analyze what he's doing. Like when you first get into playing guitar, especially the way I learned it, it was like tabs and listening and trying to figure out these weird shapes that made the right sound. And then the more you learn, or the more I learned, the more I start to realize what a key was and what harmony was and what chords were and all of that stuff. And then you realize he might not be thinking of it like this, but the chords he's playing have a name. And then suddenly you start to go, oh, it's not as complex as I thought it was, but it's still utterly beautiful. But that the mystery of what he was doing and how he was creating that sound, I was just in awe. And it was like, as I say, it was like listening to a magic trick when I just started to learn a few G chords or whatever. And then suddenly you got this guy with this guitar intro playing such an amazing thing. I just wanted to know how it worked. And so it was kind of awe and fascination. And then I guess another song, I guess that's a slightly more a different emotional impact was when I first heard Carole King, You've Got a Friend.
oh, that
because I know, and it spoke so directly. And it was one of those songs that I remember listening to the lyrics of and just feeling like she was speaking to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's amazing that someone can sing and speak. And in the same way that Jimi Hendrix, I think when he plays guitar, he sort of speaks. It's something lyrical about what he does. So that there were two emotional. I'd probably have to choose one. So I'd probably say the earliest moment emotionally would have been Jimi Hendrix and Little Wing. But
wonderful.
Yeah.
I had a friend back in the 90s when I was doing bands. We had this guy that was doing some bits and pieces for us, and he was in a band. And he said he was in America once in the mid-90s, and he was just in this bar and he was just chatting to some guys, and one of them said, "Look, I'm going to go. After the bar shuts, we're going to go back to mine and just have some drinks. Do you just want to come?" They were like, yeah. And he said, like, we just kind of went up this huge drive and just thought, wow, this isn't your average like after party in your mate's flat. He just walked into this huge house and he was like, where are we? This is surreal. And then just see all of these like platinum discs all around the wall. And he was just like, mate, like, what? Do you live here? Is this your house? He went, no, it's my mum's house. He was like, who's your mum? He went, Carole King. And he was just like, holy shit. He said, I'm at Carole King's house.
That is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it?
Well,
you mentioned that you picked up the electric guitar then. So you back in them days, like, where was it? Where was growing up?
Growing up was in Oxfordshire in the countryside, in a very little village. And yeah, that was my first, well, when I was in primary school, I learned clarinet. That was my first ever sort of musical kind of experience. And then I realized quite quickly that I didn't love clarinet, but I did love music and I liked doing stuff like that. And then I just saw there were guitar lessons at school in my primary school. So I did that. It was like group guitar lessons, learning kind of like, the simplest of chords and things like that. And then I just got obsessed with it, basically. I started doing lessons at secondary school. And I think up until I was about 16, 17, I was just happy to be on stage with a guitar or in my bedroom. I didn't want to sing. I didn't want to write songs. I didn't want to do any of that. I was so shy. And as a performer, the idea of singing on stage was petrifying.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was initially, I just fell in love with playing guitar and blues. And my dad had a guitar, like an old acoustic guitar in the living room. Every now and again, he kind of strummed a few chords. And I think that was what gave me the idea when I saw guitar lessons at school. I thought, oh, my dad's got a guitar. I've heard him play. I'd like to learn how to do that.
You mentioned like Hendrix and Zeppelin and Carole King. These are all artists that peaked way before he was even born. So you said there was a guitar laying around. Was home quite musical? Was you exposed to these records kind of via your parents' record collection?
Yeah, I suppose I was, because I wouldn't say my parents they've not got a huge record collection, and I wouldn't even say they're sort of obsessed with music, but they really do love it. And they'd often be playing stuff on the hi-fi, and my mum was a big fan of like Jackson 5 and a lot of Motown stuff, and my dad liked Black Sabbath and The Who, dad rock central. And I guess that was for our, and Stevie Wonder and all of those artists that kind of came up at that time. And it's kind of like the classics, isn't it? And so
Yeah,
I remember those were the songs that I think I immediately latched onto first as a kid, because those were the ones that my parents would put on the stereo. And so that was the kind of music that we listened to. And for that reason, I think I don't really remember sort of new music until I got to sort of teenage years, and I started to want to know what was going on in the music scene right now. But when I first heard music, it was more through my parents and the things they would listen to. And it was even things like when we were kids. I've got two brothers, and we'd be learning instruments, and then they'd say, "Oh, you should play together. George plays the drums, Tom's playing saxophone. Why don't you go and learn something?" And they'd say, "Why don't you go and learn that, Stevie Wonder song or that Manfred Mann thing?" And we'd do that and then go and play at the school concerts. But they were always old songs. And so I think that led us to learning and knowing about those kinds of artists first. And obviously there's such a wealth of music that you can draw upon. And, there's never been another Jimi Hendrix. So you kind of can't help but get stuck into it, really.
You touched on performing at school and stuff. So let's talk school. Tell me about the song that reminds you of your time at school, please, Rhys.
Well, yeah, so going back to kind of when going to secondary school and first kind of, you start to have a friendship group and getting into pop culture. And the band that was biggest back then for my sort of friendship group were the Libertines. And their song Don't Look Back in Anger sort of seems to soundtrack a lot of memories from those days when I was like 13, 14. Up the Bracket, I don't think that song's on Up the Bracket, but Up the Bracket was like the first album I remember being really, really into. And, Pete Doherty, for all of his sins, was, the coolest guy in the world to me back then. Just this kind of nonchalant poet that could just sort of stroll into interviews and charm everyone, and then, just be rock and roll all over the place, basically. So, and then again, having learnt guitar, the guitar bands were the natural sort of next step when you started learning about new bands at the time. And there were so many. It was, the Libertines, and I remember the Cribs and Franz Ferdinand and Block Party and all these other bands that were kind of like that indie. It was such a golden era for British Britpop indie music. And I feel really lucky that, because it hasn't really come back around. I'm sure it will at some point. Everything goes around in circles. But
it feels like that. It does feel like that, because I think, if you sort of chart the kind of movements in guitar music from, the 89, with the Manchester scene through to the grunge scene in the early 90s, through to Britpop in the mid 90s. And then you had that kind of wave of sort of acoustic music towards, the end of the 90s with Embrace, Travis, I guess the emergence of Radiohead and Coldplay and bands like that. And then it's kind of went a little quiet until that kind of boom of, and I think it was the Libs that really thrust it forward. There were Block Party and Friends, all incredible bands. And the Cribs are a wonderful band. But it was the Libertines that got the front covers and crossed over. And it was like when in the 90s, when you'd see Blur or Oasis on the front page of a tabloid, all of a sudden, for whatever reason, Pete Doherty was tabloid news. He's dating Kate Moss. He's he's a superstar. He's not some little sort of indie kid that you read about in just the NME and a Melody Maker. He's front page news, and it was like, and it felt raucous, and it sounded like the Libertines. It was just it was a sort of strange racket that was. The timings felt a little all over the place, and it was ramshackle, but it was exciting, wasn't it? It was very punk.
It was it really was. And it's funny because I listen, having sort of experienced making records now and making my music, recording a lot more. Sometimes when I'm listening to my recordings and trying to work out the production, I'll get so obsessed with, it's not quite right, or I need to do that bit, get a bit messy. And then I realized, the albums I listened to and loved, and still do, all the music I listen to and love. If I was to listen to it with the same analytical brain, I'd be like, that's a bit wonky, that's not quite right. But you don't notice that. That's not what you're listening to when you listen to music. And I think it's so hard to remember that when you're making it, because you want it to be like quote unquote perfect. You'd be the best you can give. But I think what it's really good to listen to bands like that, because they're making an energy, and it's communicating an energy, and it's not precise architecture. It's just a feeling. And I think all music needs a bit of that. And the times when I've felt like I've not gotten that in my music is when I think the song suffers. And that's the music I fell in love with. And often, because of how it's made, it's often in a room live. There is that energy, and I think it's easier to create, or it was easier to create back then, because people were just playing music, and it was a different approach. And as you say, sloppy to a point, but amazing. And they were feeling it, and I love listening to those records, because it still hits me exactly the same as it did back then when I was 13 and listening to that album for the first time. But yeah, as you say, he was a superstar. What was weird is I remember thinking, this is my little, obviously it wasn't, but when you're 13, you think, this is my little secret I've got with my mates. And then before you know it, your parents are like, oh, that Pete Doherty on Jonathan Ross or whatever. And you go, hang on, he was my indie underground. But they never strayed into, even though they did hit the tabloids, they never sold out.
No.
They were always true to themselves musically. And I think that was why they could coexist in both places, because even though he was dating Kate Moss and he was on the front page news, the music they were making was still true to them. And I think that can be quite a hard thing to navigate as your success, booms, is how do you hold on to yourself and your music in spite of that fame and popularity, and probably temptation to do something that caters for this audience that knows you.
Absolutely. And I think, we talk about TikTok and using, new evolutions in social media or tech to sort of further the reach of your music and your art. And I remember I'm friends with Gary from the Libertines, and he told me that when the Libs were sort of blowing up with that first record, that they'd go and sound check, and then once they'd sound checked, like normally a lot of them would go and eat and just do what most people do until the show, just chill out. But he said Pete would go to an internet, this how long ago it was, an internet cafe, and he'd be on all the forums talking to the fans and going like, this is where we're playing tonight, then there's going to be an after show at this squat or wherever. And he said like he created the Libertines, kind of that underground cult following that blew the scene. And he was so focused on it, because you trace it back, and he was writing a fanzine for QPR, I believe. He was, he's always been very good at connecting with people in a surreal way, obviously. And it's so nice to sort of see it go full circle and see the Libertines back playing live and all looking, pretty clean, I hope, and it's all looking good. But it was really interesting to see that he was always about creating that scene and that intimacy and that connection with the listeners. I mean, it was really, really interesting, because you just presume that he'd be strung out in a squat and they'd be looking for Pete, but no, he was actually quite focused on connecting with that new audience.
Yeah, that is amazing. And actually, it's sort of similar to what I think people are achieving online, where they're creating that community. In a probably easy way, because you don't have to struggle with internet forums and all that. You can speak directly to your fans now through social media. But by the sounds of it, he was ahead of the curve in thinking, I want to have as much kind of connection with those people that support my music to know that we're together. And I think that's clearly just a natural gift that he's got, because he's just doing it off his own back. So
Absolutely. Tell me about school. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I enjoyed school. Yeah, I did. I felt like I didn't. You don't really know what you're doing when you're that age, and I feel like I sort of I didn't really grow up until I left school, to be honest.
Did you know what you wanted to be at school?
No, not really. I knew I was always doing lots of music, and I did a bit of sport. So I thought maybe both my parents are PE teachers, so it was a natural thing to maybe think about maybe going into teaching or sport in some way. But I just was so obsessed with music that kind of once I left school, it just made most sense to me. I was actually also thinking about becoming a chef at one point, because I was working in a pub kitchen, and ended up getting way more involved in it than I realized I would at like 18. And then but then I was playing open mic nights and things by that point on the weekends when I got away from the job. and I just loved it. And I just started writing songs, and that was when I realized that I actually didn't even realize you could be a songwriter. That was what I actually ended up first wanting to do, because I read, I think it's called The Song Machine. It basically heard about this guy Max Martin. I think I read an article somewhere he's writing all these hits for big bands and big artists, and he's this, you know, silent ghostwriter, really, in terms of like who the public hear about.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that'd be cool. You just write all the songs, and then you can just go home, and you don't have to do the other stuff. It's just, you know, and I love the songwriting. Once I kind of got into that, the guitar learning and all of that stuff took a back seat, and I just started to try and write lyrics and songs, and that was my focus. And then it wasn't until I was about 19 and thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going to go to uni or not? And then the idea of just going to London was this thing. I thought, go to London, things will work out. You know, that's where the industry is. So go there. And I ended up studying music in London, which turned out to be the best thing ever, because I wouldn't say my degree necessarily heavily impacted on my musical journey, but definitely being there. Well, actually, no, as in the content of the course might not have been that impactful, but I think turning up every day to an institution is a good way of like learning about how you work and the discipline you can bring to your musicianship, and that's a good lesson to learn. So I feel like just being present in a place like that around other musicians that are trying to do the same thing was the reason I was there, really. So yeah, it was, and I didn't have any plans to be the artist, really. I just wanted to go and write songs and learn about music. So it was funny that once I left uni, I started to kind of just try and make more music, make more songs, and collaborate. It wasn't long before I went through a breakup, wrote a song about it, and then suddenly there were people saying, "Oh, you ever thought about, you know, doing the singing thing and being an artist?" And I was like, "Oh, maybe," but yeah, it didn't. It still doesn't sometimes feel very natural to me to be the person like putting themselves out there with their name, but I do enjoy it, and I'm really glad it happened. But it's funny how it took that journey, because I didn't really plan to do that, if that makes sense.
I mean, have you, when you do them gigs at school, was you a confident young lad, and to do what you do now, you know, would you say you're confident now as well when you walk on stage now in front of crowds? And because it's an unusual thing to do, and for most people it would be the most terrifying thing ever.
Yeah.
You know, but tell me about a young Rhys doing them school gigs, and how your confidence was there, and tell me about, you know, now that it's a job, it's like, this is what you do. Like, how is it now walking on stage, and you know, there being audiences there, and you know, this is what you've got to do. This is where you've got to shine. Yeah.
Well, I used to get really, really nervous, and I remember being at school, you know, the school concerts, and often it was like, oh, it was more like we'd learn something, and then if we were practicing it, someone at school would go, oh, you should play that at the school concert, and we'd be like, all right, and then we'd go on stage as three brothers and just play something. And I didn't, to be honest, because I was just playing guitar, I just kept my head down, played the thing, and I didn't think too much about it. And then I remember we entered, my brother's a few years older than me, and then when his mates went off to uni, he said, do you want to be the guitarist in this band? And I obviously said yes. Coolest thing ever to be in Big Brother's band. And we ended up kind of playing all these really random little gigs. And I just felt really safe, because it was my big brother and I was just on stage playing guitar. So I don't remember being too scared about being on stage. And I guess I got sort of led into it in a nice way. It's like a sort of, it wasn't like a scary thing by that point. But then there was one moment where my brother had gone off to uni, because he's a few years older, and then I had to sort of make another band with people that were my age, and it was quite scary, because then I had to be, I didn't actually sing on stage, but I remember having to go, we did like a battle of the bands, and I just remember freaking out, because I just suddenly looked at my guitar and I couldn't remember where all the notes were, and my head just went, and I just thought, oh God, I'm not going to get through this, and then eventually did. But that was probably the scariest thing that I remember of just going on this battle of the bands and having a bit of a freak out moment of going, oh shit, sort of. I literally can't remember what I was supposed to be playing. And then and I was just, and after that it was more like playing open mic nights to like 4 people, which is also extremely scary. And I having done that since, playing bigger, more sort of professional environments, I still find that as scary, if not more scary, because there's something really, really vulnerable and naked about just one mic and a guitar in a small room. So yeah, I think I just sort of took it really slowly in stages, and I was just lucky that the experiences I got were just slow and steady. And then when I started to go into that space as an artist, instead of playing covers and things like that, it took me a long time to feel not anxious, and I still do struggle with it. And I noticed that I hold tension a lot when I'm on stage. I have to really focus on, because I get a bit tense like this, because I'm like, oh, I hope, there's a lot of this internal monologue going on. Are people enjoying it? I hope they're enjoying it. Did I just mess that last bit up? Did I sing the right? You realize my brain at one point was so busy with other thoughts, and then sometimes they'd be like, oh, what am I gonna have for dinner tonight? You just end up wandering onto other things. You go, no, come on, focus. And it's only been in the last, I'd say, 2 years where I've done a bit more. I've done a lot of support tours, actually, where I've gone on stage first and with just a keyboard player and my guitar, and they are really scary because it's not your crowd. You don't you have to win them over. And I think that was a bit of a baptism of fire, because in doing that, you have to just basically, you can't have any fear. You've just got to go out there and go, what will be, and I'm just going to enjoy it. And sometimes it's nice that people don't have any expectations of you. The shows that I feel most nervous are when there's people that are there and it's to see me because they bought a ticket to see my show. And then I want it to be amazing, and I expect that they know the record more intimately, and so they've got an idea of what that note should be and what that lyric is. And whereas when I go to a room full of strangers, it's a bit easier. And actually that's helped me come back to the space where people are paying to see me and be a little bit more confident and just sit on stage and go, you know what, I'm good enough, and even if I make a few bum mistakes, bum notes, it's okay. And so just to let go of that sort of pressure and expectation and perfectionism, I think now it's nice to get to that point. But yes, it's taken a long time, to be honest.
Tell me the first record you remember buying.
First record I remember buying, it was either the Led Zeppelin first album or the Jimi Hendrix Greatest Hits compilation, but I think it was the Led Zeppelin one, because I remember my mate Rob had a copy, and I went round to his house and he showed me this Led Zeppelin CD that I think it's the one with the black and white Zeppelin thing on, and we listened to that. And we were like 12 years old and listening to this album whilst painting Warhammer, and I just remember like, I need to have this in my life. So I remember going to Oxford and finding a copy of it in HMV back in the day, and it was really magical to like own it and to open it. And I sort of miss that. I'm sure you do as well. Every now and again I'll buy a vinyl and I'll have that same feeling, get to read the notes in the sleeve and all that stuff. But I remember it being such a world.
And I think that one of the other things that I do miss from that, there's so many benefits to streaming sites and things like that. But it's the album artwork. You mentioned that Zeppelin on the cover of the Zeppelin record. Like, it's so iconic, and so Electric Ladyland. They're all iconic covers, and you don't really remember. I probably couldn't tell you many sleeves of my favorite albums from the last 5 years. I'd probably really have to think, unless I'd bought them on vinyl. Because I don't buy CDs anymore, and it seems like it's getting harder and harder to find CDs now. Going to HMV now, and the record, it's a record store again, which is wonderful. But I do think that the artwork is a thing that's lost a little as well. That being able to sit there and hold that sleeve and just look at it and devour it, and like you say, analyze all the sleeve notes and who done that? Have we done that? Who created that? Who took that photograph? And it's like, that for me, that was, I'm a total music nerd, and I know I'm in a safe nerd space because you just dropped Warhammer, so we can.
There you go. Can we cut that?
Well, look, let's talk clubbing. Tell me about the song that soundtracked your year's clubbing.
Now, this was the song or the question that I found hardest, because I didn't really do much clubbing, and I didn't know whether it was. I didn't really know what to choose, because I guess there wasn't an era in my life where I was going out all the time, and there was one song that was kind of defining that. But I do remember in sixth form, which was probably when I was like, just 17, 18.
Yeah.
One of the worst. One of the worst. I'll tell you the song. The song is "Dance with Me" by Dizzy Rascal.
Yeah.
Which is actually an amazing song because I listened to it again once I've selected. I was like, I'm going to give that a listen. Also, that song "Bonkers." Do you remember that one that he did?
Yeah. It's huge.
Brilliant song. I sort of forget how much I actually really like the song. That sort of Dizzy Rascal era, everyone was obsessed with him. And in my school, that song, again, for the friendship group, I remember going out to clubs when you could first get into clubs, and that song being kind of like a bit of a moment. And I remember one night where I got into a club. I was underage at 17, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And you go to the bar and you get a drink, and I just got way too into it, and I woke up. Not to that song. I won't spin a yarn. But I remember waking up, and then basically after getting really drunk, I fell asleep in the club. I woke up in the club, and I was just sick all over myself. And that was my first ever experience of a club. And so I think for a long time, clubs were like this place that I just shouldn't be in. And I just had the fear of being sick of myself again. But that song, that sort of soundtracks those moments, because it was just like a really big anthemic kind of dance. It was like quite a quirky dance tune as well.
It's Calvin Harris as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
yeah.
It's quite cheeky, and it's a great sounding record. So I'll go with that one. But that was the one I struggled to answer the most, probably.
Yeah. Okay. We spoke about confidence, and I always like to ask guests, that have got hold of their confidence, and playing on stage is something that becomes more and more comfortable. But then if you're going to focus on music as a career, then it's one of the most cutthroat and difficult businesses to find your way through and achieve success. And you've reached success now, and I want you to tell me about your relationship with drive and like how driven you are.
Ooh, great question. I mean, just to touch on confidence, it's such a difficult industry to hold on to your own confidence in, because there are so many setbacks and ups and downs with it, and a lot of your self-worth sometimes can be influenced by the attitude that other people have to your music. So it's if you're in this day and age, a really obvious example is like the first week of stream. I get a report from how much my music's been streamed every week from my label or whoever it might be, my manager, and so you're really proud of the music and you want to just hold on to that feeling. But then a few days later, you'll be sent a sort of streaming update with how it's performing and what the stats are and what the data is, and just a simple thing like that maybe we didn't have access to a few decades ago, now is a big part of the kind of narrative that I guess gets given to the artist. And that's just one thing of how I sometimes struggle with kind of holding on to the value of what I do, because you can be proud of what you do and confident in your ability, but then something like that can really shake you, because you go, people don't like it, people think it's rubbish and no one's listening to it, and what did I bother writing that song for? You can definitely go down those silly avenues in your head. But in terms of drive, and I think they're kind of very closely linked. My drive and confidence, I think, come hand in hand. It's like when you're feeling confident, you have that kind of ability to drive yourself and motivate yourself. And truthfully, I sometimes, especially when I look back on the early days of me being in London and just being constantly putting myself out there making music, I think I've got less confident in a way, because as you go through life, and I'm sure it's the case in lots of areas, you start to learn more about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so the more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know. Whereas when you're young and you're slightly ignorant in a really beautiful way, you just throw yourself out there because you go, I can play guitar and I can write a song. I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to speak to that person. And you just ask the world for things that you want to, And I felt sort of a bit sort of cocky, really, when I look back, and I go, God, I wouldn't have had the confidence to do that now.
Yeah.
But back then, you don't really know what the whole thing is, so ignorance is bliss, and you don't really know what you're entering into. You don't know how big the industry is. You don't know how long it might take. So all of that stuff isn't factored in. Whereas now, I compute decisions in a different way because I go, God, that's going to take so much energy, and that might be really hard emotionally. And so there's all these things that kind of factor into things now that back in the day weren't even on my radar. So I think I was in a strange way, I was more driven or more confident back then because of that. And holding on to that now, that drive now, I think I just really love. It kind of changes because I love learning about how to record music and how to push myself in that way. So I think my drive has slightly changed, and I think I'm just keen to keep improving, self-improving, and working in a way that I feel like I'm growing. So that's kind of my main drive. But it's hard because I've struggled with my mental health over the past year or so, and that thing comes and goes, and I get that imposter syndrome some days where, especially if I'm not regularly creating, it's easy to sort of fall into this slump where you don't feel like an artist, you don't feel like a musician, and to try and get that momentum going in yourself internally again can be really, really difficult. And I've struggled with that on and off in the past few years, and I don't think the pandemic was a massive help with that, because you suddenly go from being really busy touring and gigging and writing and recording, suddenly the world stops, and that part of you is sort of left a little bit in the air, and you don't really have access to it in the same way. And I've struggled with kind of getting that back, and that's what's really nice about having an album coming out, because it sort of feels like a lot of the past few years of making that record now feel a bit more real, and I can hold on to that and go, yeah, I'm really proud of the music, and I did achieve something, and I am a musician and all of that. So it's complicated, but for me I think drive for me has always come from routine, and if you can set good habits, things just take care of themselves. I think it's like when I'm most in my groove is often when I'm doing something routinely and habitually, and I'm turning up to it every day, and I'm getting strength and I guess momentum from doing it often.
You find that complements like your well-being by doing it like that?
Totally, because if once I'm in it, even if I write 5 bad songs in a week, if I'm going to do that every day, it's just, even just cycling to the studio, going to the studio, getting out of the house, like all of those things, it sounds so simple, but the knock-on impact for me of the benefits of just going to the studio or going on tour. Sometimes when I'm on tour, I have a much healthier existence than when I'm not on tour, because with tour, you have to get up at the same time pretty much every day. I'm drinking lots of water, I'm around people, I've got a purpose for the day, I've got I've got a routine, even though it's one that changes location every day. I've got this sort of sense of structure and security. And it's funny that when I come back from tour, and it's funny, I was hearing Pete Crouch talk about this, because he talks about going from being a professional footballer to being to not having that in his life. And a lot of footballers have a similar, and it's very different, obviously. But when I come back from tour, that structure, that sort of kind of pattern of life changes. It's gone from being really rigid, really sort of repetitive and really safe, to then going back to being on your own. You get used to being around loads of people on tour. You're seeing everyone every day. You're in front of a crowd every day. You've got all this energy around you. And then you come back from tour, and the first day you wake up after being away for months, you're on your own in your own bed, and you're like, oh. And you go, and I have it sometimes. I guess I should cook breakfast, or go and get back into this like life, that routine of life again. Yeah. And those simple things like getting up, making your bed, having a shower, knowing you can go outside and go and see someone. Those things, after being the structure and routine of something like a tour or an album recording process, something that gives you real purpose. Sometimes if you don't give yourself that when those events aren't happening in your life, I definitely struggle, and my mental health definitely sort of slumps effectively. So yeah, so it's a tricky one.
I think imposter syndrome is such a bad thing either. I think like if you don't suffer from imposter syndrome, then maybe you're just a little bit too narcissistic. I think imposter syndrome's a natural thing to feel. I mean, I've been lucky to chat to the Foo Fighters on this podcast, and they talk openly about imposter syndrome, and you just think, how do they have imposter syndrome? Who are they going, oh my God, look who's over there? Like, I'm not as
I
good as
know.
that. You think you're the biggest band in the world. Like, it makes no sense, but it's totally normal. You're constantly, going to be questioning, your work, the way you approach things. I think that's, yeah, I don't think imposter syndrome's a dirty word. I think it's totally natural to
Yeah.
because you want to evolve as a person and grow as a person, don't you? I think. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, I do. I totally. I do. I do. I think it's probably quite healthy to have a little bit of it because, as you say, you don't get too big for your boots, and
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
always want to learn, and you want to, there's the sense of like that being self-aware in that respect is good. I think there's a healthy amount of it that's good. But I think that there's a danger of it sort of stopping you from actually just sometimes it's just living openly, living confidently, and just putting yourself out there in a way that feels like you're expressing yourself. And I think a lot of people sometimes hold on to themselves because they don't want to come across as arrogant, or they don't think that they're worthy of being in a room or in a collaborative process. And I think there's moments when I've realized that I'm not going for things in life because I'm going, oh no, I'm not good enough at that. I'll probably end up not doing a very good job there, or I just don't want to do that, or I won't say that on social media because people might think this of me, and I don't, So that whole imposter syndrome can go too far in the wrong direction, and I think that's when it becomes, for me, it becomes an issue because I realised I'm just sort of self-sabotaging, really.
Yeah.
So it's a dangerous line to tread.
Absolutely. It's all about balance.
Yeah.
Let's take you home. Tell me for track 6 a favourite song from an artist from your home county, please. I mean, you're spoiled, Oxford.
I'm spoiled, yeah. I mean, I could have done Radiohead. Could have done, who else was it?
Ride.
Could have done I think Glass Animals, Foals.
Foals, of course.
Yeah, Foals. I was thinking Hummer by Foals was up there. That's a great tune. I actually met, is it Yanis?
Yeah.
And when I was about 17, I remember bumping into him at the Purple Turtle or the Cellar, or one of those downstairs bars in Oxford. And I went up to him and I was like, hey man, I'm a musician, I really like your music. And he just turned around again, didn't say anything.
No.
I was like, never meet your heroes. But then weirdly, I actually met him again outside a studio in Brixton, and he was like the loveliest guy ever. And I didn't obviously tell him about the first time I met him because he wouldn't remember, and it would probably be really awkward. But yeah, it's funny because the first time I met him, I was this, really nervous teenager going up to my hero saying, oh, I really like your band, and he just blanked me, bless him. We've all changed. But yeah, sadly, that's probably why I didn't choose Hummer by Foals. But I've ended up going for an absolute classic. It's Supergrass, All Right. And talk about intros. I mean, it's a simple one, but as soon as that song comes on, it's that song. And it's just got an amazing feeling. And that could have soundtracked my school years as well, to be honest. But they're a really good band. I Should Coco, that album.
Mate.
And they were 16 or something when they made that album.
When I first saw them, I went to this gig in London, and they were I think it was like Gary Crowley Presents. It was like this TV show, and they used to you pay about £8 and you'd see like 3 like really big indie bands on one bill, and they were opening, and they were called the Jennifers, and it was, I don't know if it was all 3 of them. It's definitely Gaz and Danny, and I've still got a picture of Gaz like in this like jumper and jeans and his guitar, and he looks about 4. And he's just like looked effortlessly cool, obviously, but looked so young. And then obviously when I Should Coco come out, they were still so young. But that energy of being that young comes across in All Right and Caught by the Fuzz. They just thunder along with all the energy of youth, don't they?
They do. And also like those songs, they express something, like they paint a picture of youth. And when you're a kid and you're listening to that, you just want your teenage years to be like theirs, and you think all these stories they're telling in this kind of inventive and creative way. It was kind of, that's why I when I listened to bands like Arctic Monkeys in that first record, it was kind of the same thing. Like they're making this kind of garage band music, really raucous, but then the lyrics, like both Gareth Coombs and Alex Turner, their lyrical kind of potency to be able to say something colloquial and I don't know, creative, but about queuing up to get into club or getting caught by
Lads
the
with
police.
tracky bottoms tucked into socks, eating people with pool cues. It's like it's
Yeah,
crazy,
yeah.
isn't it? But it's so effective. It's social commentary, I guess.
It's social commentary, and from a 16-year-old who's got this poetry, and that's what's kind of mad. They don't those kind of people don't come around very often.
Yeah.
And when they do, it blows my mind. So like to know that they made those albums in their teens,
Yeah,
beyond me. But yeah,
and
so
I think they're underrated, Supergrass as well. I saw the some TV stuff about them at Glastonbury, and you just forget like how many incredible records they released. Like it was, obviously all the singles from Master Coco, but then they're playing like Pumping on the Stereo, Moving, Late in the Day. You
oh
just think,
yeah,
oh my God, they've just got hit after hit after hit. Richard III, Sun It's the Sky. It's like, oh my God, this band are just absolutely
prolific.
every track they played, Lenny, it was like just
Yeah,
banger after banger, Man-Sized Rooster. It was just all of these
yeah.
singles, they're just absolute killers. They're just a massively, I think because they come out around Britpop and you had Blur, Suede, Pulp, Oasis, it felt like they kind of just didn't get
No, they
sort
didn't,
of,
did they?
they were just a little underneath them in regards to the exposure they got, which is criminal because you look back at their best of and it's absolutely remarkable.
It is. They are a very prolific band, and I think maybe I didn't real, as you say, they didn't quite hit the big time in the same way that Oasis and Blur and those bands did. And I think because they were from Oxford and I heard about them as when I was a kid, like that, they were bigger. That they were as big as those bands to me. So it was kind of it. But you forget they're ferocious musicians as well. The records, the way that those records sound, are incredible, and I think they've got a really good balance of that kind of raucous energy as well as this kind of musicality and inventiveness and amazing production. Just like take it to another level, I think, as a band.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I believe the producers an Oxford boy as well. Was it Ian Davenport that produced their stuff? I think it was. I think he's an Oxford boy as well. Right, it's your last track, and this is when you get to be an influencer.
Oh wow! This first time.
I want you to tell me a track that you think the listeners may not know that you would like them to hear.
So we did a tour in 2018 around Europe, and we had a new sound engineer who was doing the mixing, a guy called Andy Bush, and he every time he get to a venue, he put on one song to sort of learn what the room sounded like through the speakers in the venue. And he used to put this song on, and the first time he put it on, we were sort of setting up mic stands and getting ready, and so we didn't really think much about it. And then by 2 or 3 gigs in, we found the band that was touring with me started to sort of like, our ears just sort of pricked up to this song. Before we knew it, we just sort of stood in the front where the crowd would be and listening to this song and going, wow, this is a good song, isn't it? And something about it. And do you know what's interesting is it wasn't, maybe it would have been if I'd had it in my headphones, but it wasn't like a first, some songs where you put it on and immediately you're like, oh wow, what's this? Who's this by? It was one of those 3 or 4 listen album songs in my head. It was kind of like a slow burner. And then when it sort of sunk into me, it was just magical. And basically we'd all set up and then end up listening to this song on the PA in each venue for the rest of the tour. And then from that point on, I just fell in love with it. And I just sort of I probably listened to it weekly and just put it on because I just love this song. It's called The Downtown Lights by the Blue Nile. And they're an amazing band. This kind of like seminal album that they recorded called Hats is one of my favorites. And the reason I love this song is because it is just such a pure expression of something that this person's feeling, because it does, talk about like taking your time. This song takes its time, and it's got an amazing sonic palette, and the harmonies considered, and the way he performs his vocal. It's one of those songs that I think in this day and age would be overlooked because it's 6 minutes 30 or whatever, and it takes its time, and it really breathes and it grows, and it's got this amazing outro where he starts to open up as a singer and the guitar starts to find another level, and it's just so nuanced and so well, it's just beautiful, and the band's incredible, and basically I think if you can give this 3 or 4 listens to learn it and to start to hear the depths of it, I would say you will find a song that you love for life, because it's for me, it's one of those songs that every time I listen to it, I hear something new in it, and I just love going back to it. And there aren't enough songs in my life like it, and I'm sure it's my fault for not finding them as often as I would like to. But this song is just so good, and it's the 1975 actually cite them as a sort of that album Hats as a sort of inspiration. And they've stolen lots of like sonic kind of identity from them, but I think back in the 80s and early 90s they were like the musician or the band's band. Like anyone making music at the time knew of the Downtown Lights and the Blue Nile, the band, and so they were quite sort of, they were just doing something really original with new synths and production techniques, and you can just hear in that whole album that they're doing something kind of special. So yeah, the Downtown Lights is my influence at the moment.
Wonderful. And you touched on something earlier when you said about the Libertines, how when like your folks were like, oh, there's that Pete Doherty, and you're like, hang on a minute, that's my thing. It feels to me that, and you said it was like the musician's band, like the Blue Nile, but it's an incredible record, incredible band. And whenever people talk about, the greatest bands to come out of Scotland, they never get a mention. And it does feel like they're just that band that's everybody's little secret, that it's just like, you heard the Blue Nile? No. And then you hear it and you're like, holy shit, this is incredible. And I love that. I love that little bit of mystery about them, that, they've not sold out, they've not sort of like hit the massive big time, but they've just got this body of work that is loved by everybody that hears it. And I think it's a great show. No one's ever mentioned the Blue Nile on this podcast, so props to you, Rhys, because it's a great record.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? I like that. And actually every time I speak, everyone I give that song to that hasn't heard it does exactly the same thing. It's like you hear them a few months later being like, there's this song called Blue Nile, the Downtown Lights, and it just becomes, as you say, everyone's best kept secret. So let's not tell too many people about it.
All right. Okay. Well, look, we've come to the end of the podcast. But before we wrap things up, what's happening? What's coming up?
Oh, album's out, and I'm touring it, and then I guess I start writing another one, which is exciting. But before thinking about that, I'm going to really enjoy. I didn't get to tour my first record, so to be able to tour a body of work that I'm really proud of, and excited to feel in a sort of live sense, it's going to be really rewarding. So looking forward to the tour, and then we'll see what happens after that. But I guess that's my focus for the next month or so, is having a really good time on tour.
And if people want to find out where they can see you, and where's the best place to keep up to speed with all things Rhys Lewis? It'll
be the social media world, Rhys Lewis Music, just to handle most things. And then rhyslewisofficial.com is my website. So if you feel like buying a ticket or getting some merch or a record, that's where to find it.
Wonderful. And if it's all right with you, when this comes out, we'll tag you on the social, so if people haven't found you already, they can do it that way.
That'd be great, yeah. Amazing.
Rhys, I've had an absolute blast, mate. Thanks for being gentle with me on my first one of 2023. It's been an absolute delight, and you chose some wonderful records. Thank you very much. Good luck with the record.
Cheers,
and best of luck for the tour, mate.
Cheers.
Thank you. I'm going to press stop. Don't go anywhere.